Hey everyone, in this guide I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step tutorial on how to build an MCP server that can be accessible by Claude AI. Now, to do that, we are going to start with focusing on implementing a real-world example such as a stock market API, which will give our Claude desktop the ability to retrieve up-to-date stock market data and present it to us in a user-friendly way. Now, hopefully by the end of this, you'll have the knowledge to create AI augmented services that can process natural language requests and deliver real-time data from your APIs. And the best part is you don't need to be an AI researcher or you don't need to modify any LLMs to implement this. It's all about exposing your APIs in standardized, discoverable ways. Now, what is an MCP? So, an MCP is essentially an open protocol that standardizes how applications provide context to large language models such as Claude. So we can think of MCP sort of like a USB-C port for AI applications, right? Where just a USB-C provides a standardized way to connect your device to various peripherals and accessories. MCP also provides a standardized ways to connect AI models to different data sources and tools, such as your APIs. Now, why MCPs, you might ask? So MCPs will essentially just help you build AI agents and complex workflows on top of LLMs. So LLMs frequently need to integrate with data and tools, and MCP provides essentially a growing list of pre-built integrations that, for example, Claude can directly plug into, right? So the flexibility to switch between LLM providers and vendors is very simple, right? It's a very flexible thing, right? Where you don't need to change a whole bunch of things. It's just sort of plug and play. So the best practice is it's also the best practice for securing your data with your infrastructure as well, right? So the way the architecture works, as you can see, is there's a host with an MCP client, such as Claude or IDE or any sort of tools that use AI, right? An MCP protocol essentially makes a request to the MCP server that you have, and that MCP server will then make those API requests to either a local data source or a remote service using a web API or, you know, that's how these connections are made. So let's say something changes, you can just unplug this remote service and plug something else into the MCP server. So it's very, very flexible. So the MCP manifest structure essentially is an implementation. So at the heart of any MCP implementation is a manifest file, and it's typically hosted at an endpoint called .wellknown/mcp.json on your domain. And this JSON file essentially acts as an entry point that tells the AI models about your service, right? For example, there's things in this manifest that include things such as your basic metadata, so names, descriptions, logos, authentication requirements too. It also has pointer to the detailed API specification, and then also just contact and legal information. And you can notice how there's separate fields for human and model descriptions. This is important because good model descriptions focus on capabilities and use cases rather than marketing language. So while the manifest provides a high-level overview of your service, the open API specification details and the actual API endpoints and parameters and response formats are in an API schema, right? An open API schema, which uses a structured format to describe essentially your available endpoints and operations, operation parameters and their data types, authentication requirements, response structures and status codes, and also examples and descriptions. So what you see on the screen now is a simplified example showing how you might describe a stock data endpoint, right? So you'll have things such as your path, you'll have a title, version, description, your path, a summary, operation ID, parameters. So your operation ID, get latest stock prices, right? So that's essentially the operation. And then the parameters that are needed for that operation are a symbol and an access key, which is your API endpoint. It also gives descriptions of those, if it's required, the schema for it, it's a type, the data type, string, and then you'll get your response types and your response status. So for status 200, you get description successful, response, and then you have content, and this is the output essentially, or the return. So it's an application.json schema. You'll have type, object, properties, pagination, data, and so on and so forth, right? Whereas for a failed response, you'd have a 404 or a 400 or a 500, right? And then it'll also give you the response structure to that as well. Now, this open API schema essentially will just give us the ability to precisely define input parameters and output structures. And that'll allow our AI model, in this case Claude, to understand what data is needed to make the request, extract relevant information from users' queries, and then format API requests correctly. All right, let's go ahead and build our MCP server. We're going to be using Claude Desktop for this as well to integrate our MCP server into, and this will allow Claude to essentially retrieve real-time stock market data and respond in natural language um, for our queries, right? For our requests. So before we begin, we're going to need to set up our environment. And to do so, you want to make sure that you have Node.js installed and NPM, as well as TypeScript. I will be leaving some tutorials in the description, some quick links that you guys can follow along with to download those. I already have them downloaded, so I'm not going to go through the whole hassle of doing so. But yeah, you guys can just check that out. And then also download Claude Desktop. You can just do so by going to their website. I'll also leave a description to that in the link below. So now we just need to start by finding an API to implement into our MCP server. We can do that by going to API layer. This is just a website that I use to find APIs. We can go to their products page, and then we can go ahead and search. Oh, actually, it's right here. Market Stack, real-time intraday and historical market data API. So we can just go ahead and open that, and then you just want to. They offer a free stock data API key, so we can just go ahead and get your free API key here, sign up for this, and then go to your dashboard. So now once you are logged in, you will see your API key right here on the dashboard. So we're going to just go ahead and keep that for safekeeping. For this case, I will be resetting it after I post this video so you guys can't use this, so I don't mind sharing it. And yeah, we're just going to keep this here and we're going to need it later on. So next, you want to open your IDE. In this case, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, and you want to open a new folder, and we are just going to create a new folder here and just call it our MCP server market data. And we are going to select this folder. And now that we have it, let's go ahead and initialize it. To do so, we're going to open up a new terminal. And in here, we want to type npm init-y. This will create our package.json. And then we want to install a few dependencies. For our case, we are going to be installing a model context protocol SDK, also Axios.env and ZOD. So we're going to go ahead and npm install at model context protocol slash SDK. We want Axios, we want .env, and we want ZOD. Let those install. And then we also want to npm install, and then we're going to do save-dev, and then we want TypeScript as well, because we are going to be doing this in TypeScript. So we want ts-node, and then at types/node. Okay, great. Now we can initialize our TypeScript. So we want to do npx TypeScript or tsc --init. Perfect. So now we have our TypeScript config as well. And now let's set up our project structure. So next thing we want to do is create a new folder called source or src. And then in here, we want to do a touch src/server.ts. The term touch is not recognized. So actually, sorry, this command doesn't work in PowerShell. I didn't realize. So we're going to create, we're going to open where is it? A command prompt terminal. Here we go. And then we are going to do touch src/server.ts. Okay. So now that we've created our source directory, in the source directory, we are going to want to create a new file called server.ts. Perfect. And then we are also going to want to create a .env file on the outer directory. This is where we are going to add our market stack underscore API underscore key, and we're going to set this equal to the key on our dashboard. Perfect. Now we just want to save that, and then now we are going to want to update our TS config and update our target to 2022 instead of 2016. And then we want to have our modules set to node next. And then with this module, we also want to have a module resolution, node next as well. Let's capitalize this. node next as well. And then we have our ES, and then here we want to have an outer directory as well. So we're just going to write out directory, and then here we want a /dist. Dist. Okay, and then here let's do an include, and then we're going to have our source as well. Perfect. Now that we've updated our TS config, we can go ahead and update our package.json as well to include the necessary scripts and configurations that we need. So for our scripts, we can just remove this test. And then we can have our, let's do our build. And for this, we can do a TSC. And then we want our start. And this will be a node dist slash server.js, comma, and then we have our dev as well. And this will just be a ts dash node dash dash esm and then source server.ts. Perfect. Now for our keywords, we want to add just MCP, we can just do model context protocol, market stack, market data, market stack, whatever, and then Claude. These are just keywords, right? We don't really need to put any of these in. But then author, I'll just put my name. Okay, and that should be it. So we're going to save that. And now let's go into our server.ts. So here we are going to want to start by, importing and our environment setup. All right, so here I'm just going to skip through it, but and I'll explain what I've done just because it would take forever for me to sit here and type all this out. But yeah, so this part of the code that I've just added here is essentially importing all of our necessary dependencies, right? So we have the MCP SDK, which provides the core functionality for creating an MCP server, and then we have ZOD, which is used for schema validation. Axios handles our HTTP requests, and .env will load our environment variables from our environment file, which is over here, which will just be our API key. So next, we're going to want to configure our API, and essentially we will just be declaring our API key as well as setting up our base URL. So I went ahead and did that. So as you can see, we declare our API key from our environment file, and then if there is no API key, you can just display an error, and then we have our API base URL. Essentially, this is what we will be adding our endpoints onto in the MCP server that the MCP server will provide to Claude. So next, we are going to want to be creating our MCP server constant. So we can just do a server constant server, and we can just do a new MCP server. And then within the server, we have let's start with our name. And our name will essentially just be, let's do market stack financial data. And then you have your version, which will just be version 1.0, 1.00. And then you have your description as well. So we're going to have to give a little description of this. And it will just be access, real-time, and historical stock market data. Perfect. And that should be good. So this essentially will create our a new MCP server instance with basic metadata that will help our AI model, or Claude in this instance, understand what this server provides. So this information will be visible to Claude Desktop when it discovers the server. So now that we've created our MCP server instance, we can go ahead and implement our first tool. Now our first tool will essentially just be getting our latest end of day stock information using any symbol, right? So we're going to start off by doing a server, so using our server instance, and then we can do .tool. And here we are going to just call this tool get stock quote. right? And then here we want to give a little description, and we're going to just give it a description of get real time, real dash time stock quote information. And then we want to identify the symbol, the type, and give a little description about that as well. So we want to do symbol is going to be z.string. It's going to be of type string, and we're going to describe it as a stock symbol, and then we're just going to give it a little example, um, and it'll just be, something like, oops, dot, comma, and it's going to be something like Apple, APPL, um, or let's say Microsoft or Google, right? Okay, comma that, and then now we want to create our asynchronous function here, or asynchronous request, and we're going to give it arguments, and then extra as well, and this will now run a try catch block here. So we're going to try catch, and in our try block we are going to declare the constant symbol, and this will be our argument. Args, this will just be equal to our argument or parameters that we're going to be getting. So essentially just extract the symbol for the argument. And then here we're going to create our response or our request to our market stack API for the latest end of day data on this symbol. Response equals await Axios, and it's going to be dot get, and then our API, our API base URL, and it's just going to be the end of day latest endpoint as well. And then we're going to have a little comma here, and we're going to give our parameters params, and its parameters are going to be our API key, or I guess access key, because that's what the access underscore key, because that's what our API takes it as, and it's going to be our API key. And then we want to give it a symbol or symbol. It's going to be symbols, and then it's going to pass through our symbol here. Okay. And then we can add a comma here as well. And a semicolon there. Perfect. Now we are going to check the response for empty data, right? So if our response dot data or our response dot data dot length is equal to 0, then we know that we did not get a response. So we want to create our return. This will be our return schema, and this return schema will have content, and then in this content we will have a type, and our type will just be text, and then our text, our text will be, let's say no stock data found for symbol, and then we're going to pass our symbol through. Symbol. Perfect. Now that is done, let's just make sure all of our semicolons and everything is good to go. We need a semicolon there. All right, perfect. So now that we've taken care of our instance where we don't have any return, now we can extract the stock data if we do. So constant stock data equals response dot data at position index 0. And then we want to format this response. So formatted response will then be equal to, let's say, stock quote for symbol, right? And then we want the price to be stock data dot close dot tooth. We're going to make it affixed to the second decimal point. And then we want the change This will just be our stock, let's say stock data dot close minus stock data dot open. And then we're going to do let's put this in brackets actually, just so that way we can do a to fixed of the result. To fixed, second decimal place. And then, we can make more and more response format types. I'm going to just do a couple more. I will pause this and be right back. So I just added a few more, such as, your volume, your highs, your lows, and then the date as well. And then now, after we do that, we can return our content, or for a return schema for having a response, will be content type text, right? And then we want our text to be our formatted response. And now we can just take care of, oops, this should actually be a square bracket, sorry. Content should be in square brackets. And then we are going to put this inside of squiggly brackets in here. Oh no, this is all sorts of messed up. All right, no, we're good. We're good. Let's tab these in. All right, it's fine. It's fine. All right, I'm just getting nitpicky with it now. Okay, so now that we have done that, we can, for our, oh, okay, oh, that's what it is. Okay, so we had an extra, that makes more sense. Okay, we had an extra squiggly bracket for some reason. Okay, cool. Now for our catch statement here, we can now do a console.error, and then in this error, we can just, let's say, we'll just put market stack API error, right? This will just mean that our API threw an error in its response. Declare. Okay, now we have logged our error, and we are going to set a return schema for this as well. And the return schema will just be content, square brackets, then squiggly brackets, and this will be type text. So we do text, and then text will just be a error fetching stock data, and then we can return the, I guess, the error instance of error, and then where error dot message or string error. Perfect. And let's not forget our semicolons, another semicolon here. Perfect. So now this whole section that I've coded for this tool for our MCP server, it essentially defines the first tool that Claude can use, which will just be our get stock quote, right? So we created a schema using Zod to specify what parameters the tool accepts, right? So it accepts a stock symbol, and then we also implemented the tool's functionality. So one, it calls for the market stack API, and then we, to get the latest end of day data for the requested stock, and then it checks if the data is returned. And then after that, what it'll do is it'll format the stock information into a readable format, and then it also returns the response to the MCP content format, or returns the response in the MCP content format. And then it also includes error handling as well, to provide meaningful feedback when something does go wrong. So I'm going to do this a couple more times for the other parts. So I'm going to create a tool for getting historical data as well as getting data for, a specific company tool, or like searching a specific company, right? Or ticker symbols. So I will be right back, and I'm going to implement those. So as you can see, I added a second and a third tool. So for the second tool, I added a get historical data tool. But essentially what this does is it provides historical stock price information and its schema accepts both stock symbol and optional number of days to look back. So the implementation, essentially what it does is it'll calculate the date range based on the requested number of days, right? And then what it'll do is it'll call the market stack API with the date parameters and then format the date as a markdown table for, better readability. And then it'll just sort the data by date, newest first, and the limits to the requested number of days. And then what it'll do is it'll also return the the formatted table in MCP content format. And obviously we included error handling as well. And for the third tool that we did is essentially just a search company. And essentially what it does is it allows Claude to search for companies by name or keyword. And so this implementation, what it does is it'll accept a search query parameter, searches the market stack tickers endpoint with the query, as well as formats the result with key company information such as symbol, name, exchange, country, and then limits to 5 results to avoid overwhelming responses, and then returns the formatted information in an MCP content format and includes error handling as well. So yeah, now that we have our tools that we've identified for our MCP server, we can start the MCP server in general. So we want to create an async function here, and then we're going to just call it start server. And in here, we want to have a try catch block. Now, in the try statement, we are just going to console log an indicator for us to know that the server has started. So we can just type in starting MCP server, or I guess we can just actually declare what it is, market stack MCP server. And then we want to now do a transport. So we're going to do constant transport, get a constant for transport, and then equals a new stdio server transport. And then we want to await server.connect to our transport. And then we can just console.log this indicator as well that we've connected. Market stack MCP not Nargit. Market stack MCP server started successfully. And then I guess for our error handling, we will just do console.error MCP server failed to start, and then have our error printed out. And then we can just process.exit 1 here. And now at the end of this, we can start our server. Start server, perfect. And save that file. So now this section essentially starts the MCP server using stdio server transport, which handles the communication between Claude desktop and the server. And so the server will, one, initialize the transport layer, which is just stdio used for communication. And then it connects the server to the transport and then logs success or failure messages and so on and so forth. So our transport mechanism will essentially just allow our Claude desktop to discover and use the tools we've defined seamlessly without actually integrating stock market data into Claude's capabilities. So now that we have our 3 tools, we have our get stock quote, which is just getting our latest stock price for a symbol. We have our get historical data, retrieves historical price, and then search company, which essentially searches for companies based on keyword. We can now run our TypeScript code or build our TypeScript code. So we're going to open up a new terminal here, and we are going to write npm run build, and this will essentially just compile the TypeScript code into JavaScript into the dist directory here. And now we can go ahead and integrate with our desktop, our Claude desktop. So now that you have Claude desktop open, we can go ahead and connect our MCP server to Claude desktop. So we're going to need to modify Claude's configuration file. So to do that, while you have Claude open, we want to go up at the top left, go to Files, go to Settings, and then click on Developer. Now in here, we are able to edit the config, right? So when you click Edit Config, this will open our Claude desktop _config, the config file, right? So in here, this is where we're going to want to include our MCP server. So we want to go ahead and open this with our VS Code. We're just going to open. And in here, let's add our MCP server contents, or our contents to declare our MCP server. So now that we've declared our MCP servers and declared market stack as one of them, command is known. We set our arguments to the full path to our market stack MCP server, which I need to actually replace with the actual path of our built server. So here we want to replace this with, I guess we can just go to our, honestly, I think we can just go here, click here, and click on copy path. And that should actually work. So if I go in here and I paste this, and obviously fix these into, is it double backslash or is it forward slash? I do believe it's double backslash. Oops. We want double backslashes here. Just make sure you double backslash these. Perfect. And then here we want to replace this with our API key, which we can just get from our environment file. Paste that in there and save that. So now that you've replaced the argument with your full path and then your API key with your market stack API key, we can just save this and we can go ahead and restart Claude Desktop. Actually, before you do that, let's just go ahead and remove the console logs that we had on our server, just because what will happen is the MCP or Claude will try and initialize anything that's not JSON, and it'll just throw you an error. So we're just going to want to get rid of those. I forgot to mention that, but it's all good. That's all we need to do. So you can just go ahead, save this file, and then what we want to do is we want to start our MCP server. So we can do that by doing node dist server.js. But before we go ahead and restart our Claude, let's just go ahead and remove those console logs, just because I do believe that Claude will try to take anything out of our log output and use that. And since it's not JSON, it'll just throw you an error. So let's just go ahead and do an npm run build one more time. That will update our server.js in our dist directory. And then we want to start our MCP server now by doing a node dist/server.js. And that should be running now. If there's obviously nothing that breaks, it'll just turn off by itself and it'll cancel. But since that's running, now we can go ahead and re-quit our Claude application and reopen it. Perfect. Now that we are back into Claude, already one thing we can notice is that it says 3 MCP tools available, right? So if we go here and we go to File and you go to Settings and you go to Developer, you can see that we have our Market Stack server or MCP server running. And now Claude is utilizing this MCP server and allowing us to utilize its tools as well. So we have our get historical data, get stock quote, and search company. And then we can also attach installed MCP servers, share contacts with Claude. Claude can receive information. So it just essentially gives you your general information about the MCP servers that you have. So now that we have our Market Stack MCP server running, we can ask Claude, hey Claude, what is the price of Apple stock currently? Now, fair warning, I am doing this on a Sunday. I'm recording this on a Sunday, so it would just give us the stock price of end of day on Friday when the aftermarket closed, or when it closed during the stock or the trading times. And now we can just wait, and it should ask us to allow it to use the tool for this chat. So now it says allow tool for market stack local. You can just click on allow for this chat, and it'll give you the stack symbol, and then it also shows you the return stuff in your results, and it'll give you a structured output in a human friendly way. So Apple stock price is currently $198.15 with a change of $12, 6.48% based on the latest data from April 10th, 2025. Now, if we go ahead and I search up Apple stock price and move this over here, you guys will be able to see that closed April 11th at around 8, I guess it's from April 10th is the latest. You can see that there is a stock price of $198.15. Obviously, the change is a bit different. I'm assuming that's because um, there was after hours change as well. But yeah, as you can see, uh, you know, it traded between a low of, it gives you a low and a high of that day as well as the volume. Now we can do something like, what is the stock price for, let's say, what's one that I can think of? NVIDIA. NVIDIA. And now we can, NVIDIA is 110,938. So here, oh, let's just minimize this. So it tells you $110.93, basically on the money. So as you can see, now it's essentially using our MCP server, um, utilizing the tools for it. Let's see what, if it does give me historical data. I do believe the free API version gives you up to 1 year of history. So I guess we can ask, what is the stock price history of NVIDIA the last 7 days? And now we can allow it to use that tool as well, allow for this chat. Symbol NVIDIA days 7, here's the stock price, and it'll give us a breakdown from the 10th all the way back to, I guess, the 6th, or I guess it'll just keep going if that's the case. But as you can see, it'll tell you the open, highs, lows, close, and the volume as well, which is pretty interesting. I mean, you know, let's see, can you find the um, ticker symbol for Microsoft? I guess it already knows that. It doesn't really need to use our tool because it's basic. I mean, it's knowledge. So I'm not really sure what the actual tool. Search for companies by name or keyword. But yeah, so as you can see, this is essentially us using our MCP server to generate or to utilize Claude's information with our API requests. And now you can use Claude to help you build, personal you can help Claude can just be your personal finance assistant, right? Like, how are my stocks performing today? You can give it a list of stocks and you can ask it how your stocks are performing today. You can do investment research. You can compare historical performance of, let's say, Apple and Microsoft over the last quarter and tell it to run algorithms on that and to, predicting whether it's going to be go up or go down. You can also do market monitoring, so you can alert, Claude can alert you when stock prices drop below a certain amount. There's so many real world applications that you can use MCP servers for, um, and pair it with AIs, right? So you can even do a portfolio analysis, right? So for example, what's my portfolio's exposure to technology sector and stuff like that. And so essentially by implementing MCPs, you're enabling these kinds of natural intuitive interactions with your API. And so now that we've explored what model context protocols are, it's pretty much a revolutionizing way for APIs to connect with AI assistants. We've built a complete MCP server that exposes, let's say, MarketStack's API financial data to our Claude desktop application. And that will just allow the AI to access real-time stock information through natural language queries. So the key takeaways, essentially is just MCP providing a standardized platform, agnostic way to connect APIs to AI models. Implementing MCP servers requires minimal code, as you just saw, but opens up powerful AI integrations. Like, now we can integrate this MCP server with Claude, ChatGPT, Olama, like so many different kinds of AIs, because MCP servers are essentially just plug and play, right? So, by exposing APIs through MCP servers, you're making them very accessible to the growing ecosystem of AI-powered assistants and applications, right? So as AI continues to evolve as an interface for accessing digital services, you're essentially ensuring your APIs are AI ready through standard MCP protocol or through standard MCP, right? Um, and it will be increasingly important for staying relevant and accessible, um, in this new world of AI, right? So you want your APIs to be accessible to AIs and to be utilized by AIs, especially for real world applications that require real time data processing. But anyways, enough of me rambling. I'm so glad you guys stuck around for this, and I'm glad I was able to show you guys how to build an MCP server and how to pair it with an AI application such as Claude Desktop. Now, if you have any questions or concerns, be sure to leave a comment down in the description down below, and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you, and have a good day.